Dr. Gary, my first question is I'm going to direct it towards you. Of the evidence that's been presented thus far, it's still not clear to me how much is concrete, documented information, and how much is speculation, or perhaps just filling in the gaps with assumptions based on what's out there. So my question for you, Dr. Gary, is could you elaborate more on the specific hard evidence that supports your claim that the Chinese market in Wuhan was the most likely source of the virus?
Certainly, and thank you for the question. There is a lot of evidence that this virus emerged from the Henan seafood market in Wuhan, but let me just focus on 3 points: epidemiology, molecular forensics, and genetics. First, the epidemiology. The early cases from December 2019, before the disease was even described, all centered around, in fact, they painted a bullseye on the Henan seafood market. The molecular forensics. Environmental samples were collected from the market after it was closed. The hotspot of SARS-CoV-2 positivity, the RNA, was in the southwest corner of the market. In those very same samples, RNA and DNA from raccoon dogs and masked palm civets was found in these samples, commingling with the SARS-CoV-2 RNA. Genetics. The SARS-CoV-2 spilled over at least twice in the market. The phylogenetics, the genetics of the virus are very clear about that. That is not compatible with a lab leak.
Dr. Gary, do we know that the virus that caused COVID-19 existed in the Wuhan Lab before the pandemic? And if not, how could we find that out?
In fact, we don't know. The intelligence community has looked at that point very intently and has not been able to determine that Wuhan had the virus. We don't have the evidence from the Chinese. It's just one of the many things that we're missing that we would like to get from the Chinese government.
Based on the bat coronavirus that we know that researchers in the Wuhan lab are working on, would it have been possible for them to create this virus? Is it possible?
Not from a bat coronavirus. If you take the time to read my written testimony, I'm going to, in that document, I went through a lot of evidence that this virus did not spill over directly from a bat to a human being. It had to go through an intermediate animal. And it's not just the evidence from the Henan market. There's other genetic evidence. The bat coronaviruses are viruses that are spread by the gastrointestinal route. For a virus like this to become a respiratory virus is just going to require too many mutations, too many changes for a bat virus to spill directly over to a human being. That could only really happen in nature with replication through an intermediate animal.
Very good. Dr. Kobletz, the next question's for you. I'm aware that through FOIA request, a lot of information from U.S. agencies and U.S.-based organizations have been obtained by people investigating the COVID-19 origins. However, it seems as though we've gotten relatively little or nothing from Chinese agencies or the Wuhan Institute of Virology specifically. So my question for you, sir, is what specific information from China would be most helpful in settling this origin debate?
Thank you, Senator. There's a range of information that would be useful for furthering our investigation of the origins of the pandemic. The Chinese government has collected lots of information about the samples that were both at Hunan Market and elsewhere in Wuhan and in other provinces where they sampled animals, but they haven't released the raw data. They've provided information, but not the data that epidemiologists, virologists have wanted to see in order to do their own analyses. Just last year, they did release more information through publications, but this is information they've been sitting on for quite a while. So there is more information that should be released and should be made, the raw data available to independent outside experts to make their own assessments. In terms of the Wuhan Institute of Virology, there should be records about the research they're conducting. There should be records about the medical surveillance they're performing on their researchers, records on the maintenance and operation of their biocontainment equipment, and all that, those documentations would be, could be reviewed by outside experts to determine if there's any signs that there was any accidents or any indications that there was, the virus was, made an escape from the lab. So there is quite a bit of information that's available, but obviously the Chinese government has chosen to be opaque about what they have and what they know in a way that has frustrated people involved with looking at this in terms of assessing both the natural zoonotic spillover pathway and also looking at the lab accident pathway.
Dr. Gary, you talked about the virus jumping from an animal into a human, and we've heard the term spillover. For the benefit of this committee, could you explain spillover?
Human diseases have come to us from animals. When we're talking about a spillover, we're talking about a cross-species transmission from one animal species to another. I mean, it could be another animal, but usually when we talk about spillover, we're talking about from an animal to a human. So animals have their own viruses, just like we do. The ones that are dangerous in the animals, though, are the ones that have the capacity to infect more than one species. You can think about a virus like rabies that can infect a wide range of mammalian hosts.
So do we know what animal or animals could have carried this virus, and were they at the market? Explain that more fully, please.
Sure. We don't know that for sure. What we do know is that when you look for the virus in the market on environmental surfaces and various places, you found it mostly in the southwest corner of the market. This is where the wildlife was sold. The animals like the raccoon donks or the masked palm civets. And in fact, many of the samples there had SARS-CoV-2 and DNA and RNA from those animals right there in the same sample. You could imagine somebody maybe came and sneezed on that sample, but the most likely explanation is that animals were in fact infected themselves with SARS-CoV-2. When you look at the drains outside of that one stall that had the most SARS-CoV-2, that drain also had virus. So it's we don't have the smoking gun evidence that there was actually an infected animal in the market, but I think we have the next best thing with this forensic molecular biology.
Very good. Thank you. Ranking Member Paul, you're recognized.